information is that the police have, according to the report that was filed, was that this group of adults was stealing out of the store, and they actually had the children participating in these thefts. Okay, so that's what they're reporting. Now, this was on Channel 12 in Phoenix that was reporting this, that had this interview with the chief. And one of the questions that the reporter asked, that's all fine and good, but did it justify that level of response? And I think that's the question you're asking. Well, again, if you need to know the totality of the circumstances, and I'm not justifying this. What other information did the officers have? Did they have information that they were armed or anything like that? At this point in time, it's not appearing that they had that type of information, that anybody was armed other than with these stolen goods that they got from the dollar store. So, and then, of course, if the reporting is what they're saying, that when they tried to stop the car, the people wouldn't get out, that they were non-compliant, if you will. Now, here's a couple of things. Now, I'm Monday morning quarterbacking this, of course, because I wasn't there, and I'm just based on this snippet of video. But now, one of the things that you mentioned, Thin Bad, was this necessary, all this over-the-top stuff? Clearly, the chief saw this, and she is saying, and she said it publicly, it was not. This should not have escalated to that point where the officers appear to be out of control. And, I would agree with her from the sense of, because here's two things, Thin Bad, that happen. When citizens are stopped by the police, they may react in a variety of ways. They may start crying. They may start freaking out. They may be cooperative. But, everybody reacts differently to stress. And being stopped by the police is a stressful thing. No question.
You got that right.
It really is, because you don't know who's stopping you. You're not sure if it's going to be a combative person, if it's going to be a person that's just going to explain things to you, if you're getting a ticket, the whole 9 yards.
You're getting shot.
Well, but here's the difference, though. The chiefs of police across the country, they spend thousands of dollars every month training and retraining their officers. They're training them coming out of the academy. They're training them at in-service training. They're training them during special training sessions. They have training brochures, training videos, training simulators, scenarios. They have just a plethora of training opportunities that they offer to their personnel so that they can control themselves when they're under stress. And as part of that training, the evaluator is supposed to look for those things that indicate a person may not react appropriately when they're put under various types of stress. And that's what the training division is supposed to do. So one of the things I'm sure they're going to look at as part of this investigation is that those officers' training records. Did they go through? Were there any notations? Were there any concerns? Did they pass the test, the written test, the practical test? They'll be looking at all that stuff. All right, that's from one sense. The other side of the equation, of course, is, as part of the, your tactical approach, you have the option of time. You had the car in a parking lot. It wasn't going anywhere. There's time to call for additional people. You have a tag. You have children involved. So at that point, you have time to slow that thing down. You really do. You have time to just slow it down a few beats and just figure out exactly what you have going on. And I don't think any of us can argue that a young lady holding a baby is probably going to present you with a real danger. And you can see the baby. You can see the other child clinging to her. And just the language that we used wasn't necessary. It wasn't necessary. The pointing of the weapons, the investigation will have to kind of flush that out. What did they believe they had? What actions did they see? Those guys did not have body-worn cameras. As the chief said, they started issuing the cameras in April, but they hadn't gotten to that particular district yet. So I'm sure they'll be looking for anyone else that may have video, any stores or anything else that may be able to shed additional light.
Right.
As well as getting the statements from the officers. What did you see? What did you do? What did you say? What was told to you? They'll look at the call. They'll review the tape of the 911. If there was any tape, they'll go back and talk to the employee that saw things. They'll look at the store video. They'll just do a lot of things to ferret this out, to figure out why this thing escalated the way it did. But at the end of the day, the perception and the image was absolutely horrible.
Right. And that's it, and that's some of it too. That's the sound like we might have Steve back. Do we might have. Do we have him back?
Yes. So I think we have a caller on the line. So caller, you're on Straight No Chaser.
Oh, hi. I heard you speaking about the incident in Baltimore, and I think it was just today that there was something similar that happened in California, where a off-duty police officer, shot and killed someone in Costco. And the off-duty officer was actually carrying his baby. He was in the store with his wife, and it hasn't come out yet as to exactly what happened because it just happened today, and so they're doing the investigation. But apparently in the news, it's indicating that there was some sort of a bumping or some sort of confrontation that was made by the young man to the 32-year-old officer while he was holding his baby, and it ended up with the officer falling down on the floor at Costco trying to protect his child. And when he got up, the boy's parents got involved, and the shooting included the boy's parents and the young man. That's what I'm reading in the news, and it's still, big hotline right now because they're still talking about it like 4 minutes ago, putting out more information. So as the news indicates, is that this man had some sort of handicap, some sort of a mental disability. But although his family members are indicating they don't know anything about him having a mental disability, but he was a little slow. So they're still investigating, but this is a little bit of a twist to what's going on in Baltimore because it's still a police officer shooting. And right away, I'm not saying that the officer is innocent, but he was doing his job more than likely, and the one in Baltimore was more than likely feeling that he was doing his job. Mm-hmm. But right away, the investigation goes towards the officer, not to the person that was shot and what accounted for it. My thoughts are the officer is the authoritarian, and so yes, he should be set aside for a moment and then gathering the facts, not totally against the officer. So I'm just saying that this is happening a lot in Florida, where the police officer shot the young man while he was changing his tire, and eventually ended up with recently the officer being indicted and being given some charges, and he came back for an appeal. He lost his appeal. But again, in this case, you say the body cams and all the evidence pointed to the officer, and the investigation went back to show that the officer was somewhat of a racist. And his brother, who is also an officer, is being looked at because it's a situation that came from this officer's background, from when he was a child and when he was being raised, and what his thoughts were of people of color. Although he was a person of color, but he was of a foreign descent. So a lot of that's involved. And my major concern is with everything that's happening, pointing towards police officers around the country, I'm looking at the police officers who are committing suicide at a large rate. In 2018, there were over 128 officers nationwide that committed suicide. In New York recently, there are 4 to 5 officers who committed suicide. And what's happening with them and what's causing it? Could it be everything, the whole totalitarian of everything that's happening that's putting these officers in jeopardy? Now, this does affect the community because officers are being asked to work more with the community. So when they commit suicide, it affects the community that they've been working with and protecting. It also affects retired officers who are looking at this to say, we went through it. We're not talking about it, but we went through it. And we know that there were times when we may have been mentally driven to almost do the same. What can we do about it? Police Chief Calabrese, I think, in New York is saying that he wants his officers to be more open to mental health counseling. But that's difficult. That's difficult because they're being asked to stand tall, be strong, remain authority, don't show your weakness. Something has to change. And that's my statement.
Well, those are great points, and thank you so much for calling us from the East Coast, as we can see on our map here, and please continue to listen, and we're going to respond to that because you raised some great points.
Thank you.
When you look at the caller's points, and she raised some great points, and one of the things that I didn't get a chance to get around to, and also I got reminded that from Phil, is that you absolutely can't overlook everyone's responsibility in these incidents. There's no excuse if these folks were in the store stealing and had children doing it. There's absolutely no excuse for that. And as part of this whole thing, if there is evidence that supports that allegation, they too should be held accountable. So no one should be able to wiggle out of their area of responsibility in any way, shape, or form. But the caller also raised some good points about the stress that is related to doing the job. You do have a lot of officers who commit suicide, particularly after seeing horrific events. I remember very distinctly after the Oklahoma City bombing, there was one officer that they featured that did a phenomenal job there, just getting people out of the building and all those types of things. And then I guess about 6 months later committed suicide. And, some of the first responders from 9/11 who committed suicide. And then the officers who are still having challenges to this day who responded to Columbine and to the shooting in Connecticut and so forth. So it is it's a tough job. It's a thankless job sometimes. It can be. And it's a job that is extremely, extremely demanding. And which, again, gets back to my earlier point of why chiefs across the country invest so much money in training, in support mechanisms, in having, all types of psychological support for their troops, having the support of the chaplain, but most importantly, having the support of community members who have no hesitation in speaking on behalf of their officers. And that's happening throughout the country. So our caller from Florida and Phil, both of you are absolutely right. You can never overlook, and I hope that we alluded to that earlier, that these incidents do not reflect the majority of the officers that are doing some incredible work every single day of the year.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why it's so important that as these incidents happen, these folks that overreact and do inappropriate things, that after this thing is looked at, and let me emphasize, you absolutely must have due process for everyone involved in these incidents. It must be given to the officers who are involved, and it must be given to the citizens who are involved in this incident as well. You have to turn over every single rock and get every bit of information, whether it's accusatory or exculpatory, that will allow people, number one, to be held accountable, but number two, that you can figure out what went right and what